on.
You busy? It's time for a podcast. It's Mrs. Wilbren. Wait, what?
Sup, you guys? It's Mrs. Klein.
Okay,
I
here
can't
we
see-
are.
My 53-year-old eyes don't work very well, Mrs. Wilbren.
Sorry, guys. We're here with your podcast.
There we go. Yes.
For lesson 14. And so we're going to be talking about lesson 14, sections 4 and 5.
Okay.
And just a reminder, lesson 14, Andrew Jackson and the Growth of American Democracy. And your guiding question is, how well did President Andrew Jackson promote democracy? Be thinking about that as you hear this podcast.
Okay. All right, you guys. So we also have some vocabulary words that you should be aware of. Civil servant. Some of them you're going to hear in this podcast, and others are going to be a part of the reading notes that you guys will get. So civil servant, Jacksonian democracy, secede, the spoils system, trail of tears, and also tariff is going to come out of lesson 14 for you.
All right, and this podcast is going to start. We're going to be talking about rising sectional differences. And as you guys remember, when President Jackson took office in 1829, conflicts between the Northeast, the South, and the West were pulling the nation apart. That era of good feelings is over.
Yeah, definitely.
Lawmakers from these sections were arguing about 3 economic issues.
All right, the first was conflict over the large areas of land that the federal government was selling as public lands. Northeasterners did not want the lands in the West to be sold at low prices. They were concerned that the cheap land would attract workers who were needed in Northeastern factories. Westerners wanted low prices so that more people would settle in the West.
Mm-hmm. The second conflict was about improvements in transportation. The Northeast and West wanted the government to spend money on transportation to help transport goods. Southerners opposed this because the money to pay for the improvements would come from tariffs, and Southerners did not want an increase in tariffs.
The issue of tariffs was the third sectional conflict. Northerners supported high tariffs because they made imported goods more expensive to buy than American-made goods. Southerners were against higher tariffs. They sold their cotton to foreign buyers in exchange for foreign manufactured goods, and higher tariffs would make these goods more expensive. And then also people are wondering, if America is putting tariffs on foreign goods, who's to say that Great Britain or France or any other country we're dealing with is then going to put tariffs on American products coming into their countries as well? So
exactly,
kind of a tension-filled issue.
So this tariff issue, the tariff of abominations and crisis over nullification is what we're going to talk about next. And in 1828, Congress raised the tariff on raw materials and manufactured goods. This tariff outraged Southerners, who called it the tariff of abominations. Southerners had to sell their cotton at low prices to be competitive, but tariffs forced them to pay high prices for the manufactured goods they needed. The tariff issue helped Andrew Jackson win the election in 1828.
All right, South Carolina was especially hit hard by the tariff. Some leaders in the state began talking about leaving the Union over this issue. John C. Calhoun, then Jackson's vice president, wanted to keep South Carolina from actually leaving the Union at this time.
Yeah. Calhoun proposed the doctrine of nullification. This said that a state had the right to reject a federal law that it thought was unconstitutional. Calhoun believed that Congress had no right to impose a tariff that favored one section of the country. So he felt that South Carolina had the right to nullify or reject the tariff.
All right. This leads to a series of debates, you guys, that are called the states' rights debates. Calhoun's ideas about nullification caused much controversy. Some people supported a strong federal government. Others defended the rights of the states. The Senate debated the issue in the Webster-Hayne debate in January of 1830. Daniel Webster, a senator from Massachusetts, was opposed to the idea of nullification. Robert Hayne, a senator from South Carolina, supported it.
Yeah. In April 1830, Calhoun and other supporters of nullification tried to use a Democratic Party dinner to win support for their position. But at the dinner, President Jackson made it clear that he supported the power of the federal government and was opposed to nullification. From that time, Jackson and Calhoun were political enemies.
And vice president and president.
Yep.
Okay, all right, you're my enemy. All right, so now we're going to talk about South Carolina threatening to secede or leave the Union. Although Jackson opposed nullification, he did not want to drive the South away. So he asked Congress to lower the tariff. It did so in 1832, but Southerners still thought the tariff was too high. South Carolina nullified the tariff Acts of 1828 and 1832. It also voted to build its own army. South Carolina's leaders threatened secession or withdrawal from the Union if the government tried to collect tariffs.
Jackson was angry. He ran for re-election in 1832 without Calhoun as his running
That's no
mate.
surprise.
Yeah, Jackson won the election. He then said that he would use force to make sure that federal laws were obeyed and that the Union would stay together. Henry Clay worked out a compromise tariff in 1833. The compromise kept South Carolina in the Union.
Okay, and again, like I'd like to say, like think about Clay and compromise, that hard C sound for both of them, because Henry Clay, this is again another compromise that he's involved in, and we're going to learn about even more to kind of hold the country together.
And we're going to kind of switch gears and
Yep.
start talking about another issue that Jackson faced in his presidency, and that is the National Bank.
Yeah. All right, you guys. So it was called Mr. Biddle's Bank. So the second bank of the United States was the most powerful bank in the country. Its president, Nicholas Biddle, set policies that controlled the country's money supply. President Jackson disliked the bank. He thought it had too much power. He felt that the bank's policies favored wealthy people and hurt the average guy.
To operate, the bank needed a charter from the federal government. Its charter was scheduled to expire in 1836, but Biddle asked Congress to renew it in 1832. That was an election year. Biddle thought that Jackson would agree to the renewal and not risk being defeated, but Jackson took the risk.
All right. And Jackson vetoed Congress's renewal of the bank's charter. He said that the bank was unconstitutional. The Supreme Court had ruled that the bank was constitutional, but Jackson claimed that elected officials could judge whether a law was constitutional for themselves. They did not have to rely on the court.
Jackson's opposition to the bank was a major issue in the 1832 election. The people agreed with Jackson. After Jackson won, he set out to destroy the bank. He took federal money out of the national bank and put it into state banks. As a result, the national bank went out of existence.
Yeah, those state banks are called pet banks, and
Yeah.
he's just like, all right, we're basically gonna bleed you dry, banks. We're gonna take all the money away so that you don't have the ability to be able to operate.
Exactly.
Okay, all right.
Okay, thanks for listening.
All right, you guys, we're done.